Yo, what's good everyone, it's Zigzag here, welcome back to another Geoguessr video. It's my first video in a long time which is targeted at new Geoguessr players. Essentially, this is going to be for those who have just started the game and want some really high yield tips for identifying countries which are really easy for experienced players to identify. Before I get into specific country tips, which I have 15 of today, I just want to show you two maps which are very important to learn before we get into things. So, first one is which countries drive left and which countries drive right hand side of the road. As you can see in the red, most countries drive right, but those countries which were colonized by Britain and a few others do drive left-hand side of the road. That is very useful to know. Of course, Southeast Asia is probably the place that is most useful to learn because the pattern is not so easy to identify. Anyway, you can check out that yourself. Also, we have where official coverage is, so basically all these red lines. So this is map making app, a great way to make maps on Geoguessr, but it also shows you exactly where the official coverage is. All the red lines are places with official coverage. You can see every country in South America minus the Guineas and Venezuela have it. Central America's a bit mixed, and then Africa and Asia are quite sparsely covered, so you just have to learn which countries actually have official Street View. As you can see, there are some countries with tiny bits like China. You shouldn't really worry about guessing those, whereas those countries with a lot of red lines, such as India and, you know, all of Europe, those ones are very much worth knowing that they're in the game. Okay, so with those two out of the way, let's get through to some country-specific tips which are very important to know. Tips which will never fail, which are basically always going to work. So first one here is Iceland. Without looking at this background landscape, which is super Icelandic, there are two tips which really help. Number one, you have this yellow bollard. I think Iceland's the only country that has full yellow bollards like this. So these are super useful. They show up basically in like maybe 70% of Icelandic rounds. Super useful. And then combine that with the kind of dark gray soil, which is very Icelandic, and the white car with a long antenna. Now you can see the brake light here and this little bit of white. The white peeking through can also be seen in the blur. You guys can see the dirt around it kind of appears like a white ghost, and then a longer antenna with ribs on it. This one is Icelandic, and you can find it in many other countries, but in Iceland 100% of frames will have this one provided they're on a road. So very useful stuff, and Iceland becomes super recognizable, not to mention this landscape, which is quite simply like nowhere else. But yeah guys, you should never fail it once you know these four things. Okay, next one here, we have Ghana. Ghana is a country which is already pretty easy to identify. It's very green, it has all white road lines, you're driving right hand side of the road, and you're in Africa. However, one tip that literally encompasses 99.9% of Ghanan rounds is that you have a roof rack with a tape, a black tape on the end of the roof rack on the top right one here. So the front right roof rack has black tape on it. The only other place you can find a black tape on a car is in Reunion Island, and trust me, the two places look very different. If you see a black tape on a car, strongly consider going Ghana, because it's only in those two places, and most times you see it, it will be in Ghana. And I'm telling you guys, every Ghana round will have this, so if you think you might be in Ghana, do look down, because, you know, as much as we don't like car meta, it is very useful. Eventually, you'll be able to recognize Ghana with no problems without the car, but when you're learning, it's very useful to know. You don't want to miss out on those easy points. Okay, next one here is Nigeria. Now, Nigeria has a bunch of different Google cars. You can see this massive blurred one here. However, the most underrated tip, which I see new players missing on Nigeria, is that you always have a police car following you. I would say at least 95-ish% of rounds include the Toyota Hilux follow car in some regard. It's sometimes white, it's sometimes black. However, it should always have this red and blue light on the top of it, and yeah, it's going to be following behind the Google car. So if you pan this way to the front of the car, you're not going to see it. However, behind, you will see the Toyota Hilux. It's super useful stuff, and honestly, if you're considering Nigeria, look for the police car, because most times you will see it. Next one here is Guatemala, another country where the coverage is stuck back in 2016, or in that kind of earlier Generation 3 camera era, and so therefore we have a roof rack again, and we have the silver car with rear view mirrors. So this car has some similar equivalents, such as Kyrgyzstan, which I'll show next, and also Laos. However, this specific design with the kind of thick black rear view mirrors is very much only found in Guatemala, and if you combine it with looking at the landscape, you should always be able to get Guatemala with this. It is unique, you just need to learn the slight differences between the other two. However, the main point is that 100% at this stage of Guatemala rounds include this Google car, so it's super useful to learn. Next one here is in Kyrgyzstan. You can see the Google car is relatively similar. I think the front blur should always be perfectly round like this, But in any case, you can see more of the silver car here, and the rearview mirrors definitely are a little bit less chunky. So yeah, that is the car that you'll always have in Kyrgyzstan as well. Basically, these two are countries that are just stuck back in 2015, 2016 coverage and always have this this roof rack car. Super useful to know, super high yield, so definitely remember those two. Next one here, we are switching to some more real life stuff. We have Taiwanese poles. So in Taiwan, you have these black and yellow striped poles. They're diagonal and they go all the way down to the ground. So as you can see, this is a pretty unique looking pole. You can definitely see it from a far distance, and you specifically have to remember this one in conjunction with some of the others. So let me show you those. This one is the South Korean pole, also yellow and black, also kind of going diagonally, but never going down to the ground. This is crucially the thing about South Korea. It's quite a short sticker in comparison. You know, South Korea already looks quite a bit different, but on a round like this, it could look a little bit like Taiwan. Just look for the pole stickers. They should be on most poles. Very useful tip indeed. Okay, next one here is Japan. Now, Japan, I'm going to include two tips right now. The number one tip is this yellow sticker here, which, as you can see, is quite a bit different to the other two because the stripes are vertical. And you can see also that it does not go down to the ground, so very useful stuff indeed. Additionally, the Japanese camera is low to the ground because of privacy concerns. They have the camera set lower. So you can see that in comparison to these cars here, we're not really too far above them. The camera's definitely a lot lower. You can easily tell when you come up against like a sign. Like, why would this sign be so far above the ground? The reason is because the camera is lower. So if you can see the blur ends up being a whole lot bigger, you can easily check that. And especially in previous camera generations here, you can see the back of the car here is pretty huge and the blur is going all the way to the edge of the roads. And you can see this woman, she's like kind of almost in line with us in terms of verticality. So very useful stuff to know. Now, there are other countries that also use low camera as well. So let's talk about those. Switzerland also, for privacy reasons, uses it, and you can see it has this massive blur. Now, you can see we saw the white car last time, a bit of like that kind of ghost of the white car. In Switzerland, that shouldn't really show up. You should just have a blur, and yeah, you can see it's super huge. Just go into a game yourself and see how big a normal blur is, and you can see this one's actually about double the size, so it really is easy to get. And then you just look in the distance, you see it looks like Europe, and you see you have a low camera, so that should just be an easy send for Switzerland. The third main country that uses low camera, and only in the brand new coverage, is Sri Lanka. So some Sri Lankan rounds will have it, some won't, but the brand new coverage will have it, and you can see, again, it's just a very big blur. Maybe it's not quite as low as the other two, I would say, but yeah, it's definitely recognizable as low camera. You can see we're kind of in line with a pickup truck here. In a normal one, we'd be above the car next to us, but you can't really make that out. Now, it's worth mentioning that some of the new countries that have been released in Africa do have lower camera, but you can always see the pickup truck car meta there. So yeah, it's worth keeping that in mind if you're playing no moving, panning, or zooming, but on no moving, you can just check here. There's no Google car visible, so yeah, should be Sri Lanka. Okay, next one here also has a bit of a low camera vibe. However, I want to teach you guys this one because it's very important to know. Basically, we call this one the crap camera, and it's just really low quality. You can see details are kind of hard to make out. It's definitely looking a little bit older. However, this was actually published in 2023. So basically, this crap camera is predominantly in Nigeria, Cambodia, and India at the moment. However, you can find it in other countries more rarely, but just keep an eye out for this one because you can use it to get those three countries pretty commonly. And of course, India uses white center lines, whereas Cambodia uses yellow ones, so you can use that to distinguish between the two Southeast Asian variants. But yeah, it should normally be a big round blur like this. Sometimes you can see the car as well. Yeah, this is definitely a huge blur. It's covering like 3 lanes here, so should be pretty recognizable, as well as the low quality, which isn't really seen in the other low cam examples. Okay, next one here, we're moving back to a real life tip instead of a Google car tip, and that is that Brazil is the land of the red soil. Pretty much most Brazil rounds will have this very deep, dark orange soil on the side of the road, and you can use that to guess Brazil pretty consistently. Now, there are many other countries with red soil. However, Brazil is the big country where you always see it, basically. So, you know, if there is no red soil, consider leaning away from Brazil, and if there is red soil, consider leaning to. Obviously, in such a huge country, there are counterexamples, but it is just definitely a rule of thumb to describe Brazil. Okay, next up is Chile, and Chile is actually one of the easiest countries in South America because they exclusively use white lines on their roads. There are a few counterexamples. For example, sometimes they'll use all yellows, as in yellow in the middle and on the outer lines, but basically Chile should be using all white lines most of the time, and that is unique for the Americas. Indeed, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Colombia, in Mexico, they're using a yellow center line, whereas here in Chile, they distinctively have this scheme, which looks more European. So very, very useful stuff. Can get you a lot of free points if you're cognizant of it. Okay, next one here, I just wanted to give a little bit of a rule of thumb, and that is that over in Europe, you're often going to have some kind of an antenna, whereas in the US, basically they never have any antenna, especially on the old coverage, there were just never any antennas. And so let me show you the difference here. Here we are in another US lock, and this time we've got the updated camera. The colors are much more vibrant than the previous one we looked at. Skip back 5 seconds if you want to compare the difference. But basically, I just wanted to give you another rule of thumb, which is that while you see an antenna in Europe and no antenna in Europe in the Generation 3 coverage, the older looking coverage. By the way, let me interject there. I do have a video explaining the camera generations, but let me give you a 5-second explanation here. I'm on a better road than I was before. But basically, you can see that back in 2011, they were using this kind of coverage where there is no Google car and everything's a little bit less vibrant. If you skip forward to Generation 4 coverage, then you can see that the sky gets a lot more blue and everything becomes a lot brighter. There's higher contrast. And yeah, this is what Generation 4 camera looks like. And so yeah, that is what I meant by Generation 4. So in this new coverage in the US and basically everywhere outside of Europe and Africa, you can see that there is the bonnet or the hood of the car visible here. So when we see this little smudge here, we can deduct without seeing anything else that we are driving right-hand side of the road because we see the center lines here and we see the front of the car, meaning the car is driving this way. Whereas in Europe, we can see the back of the car. So here we can tell basically that we are driving right-hand side of the road because the back of the car is more so on the left-hand side of the road, meaning if we turn to the front, we are driving right. So yeah, this back is what I was talking about for Europe and Africa, namely South Africa and all of Europe have this one. And yeah, I mean, there are exceptions, but 98% of the time this should be consistent. Interestingly, it's something that was kind of discovered quite a bit later on, but it is very, very useful indeed. Just keep an eye out for that. Look for the back or the front of the car once you get a little bit better, and it can really help you out. Okay, that was a bit of a tangent, but let's move back to some real life stuff again. And here we have Dutch yellow plates. The only ones you need to worry about in Europe, apart from Netherlands having yellow plates, is Luxembourg, which has all yellows. Then some other countries have rarely yellow plates, but Netherlands is pretty much 100% same with Luxembourg. And then we have the UK, where they use yellow rear plates, however white front plates. And that repeats itself in some British colonies as well around the place. But yeah, basically the UK, apart from the Netherlands and Luxembourg, is the only one to use the yellow plate in Europe. And also, look again, we have the rear of the car here. So again, we can tell that we were driving left-hand side of the road because if we face the other way, we are driving that direction. So that's the back of the car. Okay, next one here. We are over in Russia. Now, Russia can be quite an intimidating country even to identify, but for a new player, the best tip I would give is that a good majority of the time, traffic signs are painted white at the top with a black sock at the bottom. So this one shows up all the time for Russia. It's super useful. They have also lots of these roadside poles called bollards on their intersections. We can see a bunch here. That's very typical in Russia. If I move over to this intersection, yeah, there are a bunch of bollards here. Obviously, once you get a little more experienced, you'll notice that. But yeah, basically this signpost as well as the black car with the long antenna are two really great tips for guessing that you are in Russia. Okay, next one here, we're moving back to some roadline stuff, and here in South Africa and the Southern African nations of Lesotho, Botswana, Eswatini, and South Africa use these yellow outer lines. Super useful stuff. Also, this double white line with a line in the center is also pretty unique to South Africa and the Southern African countries. So yeah, it's really easy to guess them once you have seen this, and then you combine that with the kind of fairly dry landscapes, sometimes with the farmland, and you should be good to go. Also, in addition to that, in countries like Jordan, the UAE, Israel, and Palestine, you also have yellow outer lines. So that's what you have to watch out for. However, the landscapes tend to be pretty different, so you should be good in that regard. Also, Jordan, for example, always has this black car with no antenna at the rear, so you can definitely guess Jordan based on that. Here is a better example of it. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind for guessing Jordan specifically. Coming up to the final tips here, but another country you can really easily identify by the Google car is that of Mongolia. Mongolia. Mongolia either has this white one with the roof rack and a snorkel. That's the less common one, but you can definitely see that more so towards the capital city. And then also this car with the big tent on the front of it. You can also see the snorkel peeking through sometimes as well. And yeah, and also has a spare tire at the back as well, yeah, worth keeping in mind. And this one is the Mongolian Google car. This is the main one, and super easy to remember, right? This tent, one of the first things I ever learned about Geoguessr. In fact, one time I'd been playing Geoguessr a little bit recently, and then I went to dinner with my friend who still, like, plays a little bit of Geoguessr now and then. And he was talking about the tent on the top of the car. I was like, oh yeah, that's such a quirky thing. I was very pleased to learn that one of the first metas I ever learned, so definitely one you should also learn too. But they're going to add some more coverage to Mongolia soon, so stay tuned for whatever's going to happen next in Mongolia, but for now, this is the main one. Okay, and I think this is my final tip for the video. I don't know if we may have gone over 15 a little bit, but here we are at Italy, and we have the Italian license plates. So Italian license plates have blue on both sides. Now you can see that in France as well pretty commonly, but the Italian front license plates are notably shorter than their back ones. So if we compare this one, it's definitely like only 2/3 the length of this one on the left here. So definitely keep that in mind. It's one of the only short plates in the whole of Europe. Now Europe tends to love using these longer plates with the blue strips on them, obviously, for the EU. So you gotta keep those in mind. And definitely over in North America, US, Canada, Mexico, they use these shorter style of plates, obviously without blue strips, so you can definitely keep that in mind. And yeah, the length of plates is something you learn as you go along, but that rule of thumb of longer ones in Europe and shorter ones in America is definitely useful. And again, here we have the back of the car, meaning we're driving right-hand side of the road through this parking lot. Definitely good to keep in mind. That's one. It's a little bit more advanced, I know, but definitely keep that in mind as you get better. Okay, I think that is it for it. Yeah, there we go. That is it for the tips. We're back to number 1 here. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video all the way to the end. Hit like and subscribe because I do lots of videos where you can learn a lot, especially as you improve. I also have my second channel called Geoguessr Explained. Just YouTube search that and hit it up because it is a really great way to learn as well, if I don't say so myself. But guys, thank you very much for watching the video all the way to the end. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in a video very soon. Till next time, and goodbye.